For 11 years, a small town lived next to an unsolved disappearance, and a retired detective who's never spoken publicly about what he actually found in the woods behind an old man's house. Until now. This is The Man Who Kept the Lights On. Welcome back to Midnight Whispers. The town, we'll call it Ashford Hollow, though that's not its real name, had never had a case like this before. It started with a missing woman named Diane, 34 years old, a schoolteacher, well-liked, the kind of person whose absence leaves a hole in a town that size. She taught 3rd grade. She volunteered at the local library on weekends, ran the reading program for kids who needed a little extra help. She was engaged to be married the following spring, had already picked out a small venue near the lake where half the town had celebrated one milestone or another over the years. The kind of person, in other words, who people in a small town notice going missing almost immediately, because everyone had some small connection to her, some memory of a conversation at the grocery store, or a parent-teacher meeting, or a wave across the street. She vanished on a Tuesday night in October, driving home from a parent-teacher conference. Her car was found the next morning, engine off, doors locked, keys still in the ignition, parked neatly on the shoulder of a quiet county road. No sign of a struggle, no sign of her at all. Her purse was still on the passenger seat, phone inside it, battery dead. A half-finished coffee sat in the cup holder, cold by the time anyone found it. Nothing about the scene suggested panic or violence or a struggle of any kind. It looked, according to the officers who first responded, like she'd simply pulled over and stepped out of the car for a moment and never come back. The investigation went nowhere for years. No body, no suspect with enough evidence to charge. A few early theories: a jealous ex-boyfriend from years earlier, a stranger passing through town, even briefly her own fiancé, who was cleared within days once his alibi checked out completely, a room full of coworkers who confirmed he'd been at a work dinner 2 towns over the entire evening. Search parties combed the woods along that road for weeks in the beginning. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through fields and treelines for miles in every direction. Nothing turned up. Not a shoe, not a scrap of fabric, nothing at all. Just a case file that got thinner with attention every year it sat open, and a town that slowly stopped talking about it out loud, even though everyone still thought about it whenever they drove past that stretch of road, slowing down almost involuntarily, glancing toward the shoulder where her car had once sat. The detective who worked the case, I'll call him Detective Reyes, though that's not his real name either, told me something that never made it into any official report. Something that, as far as he knows, only 3 people were ever aware of. About 6 months into the investigation, an elderly man living alone on a property near where Diane's car was found started calling the station. Not to report anything specific, just small, strange complaints. He said his porch light kept turning on by itself in the middle of the night. He said he'd wake up to find his back door unlocked, though he was certain he'd locked it, the same way he'd locked it every night for the better part of 30 years, a habit so ingrained he could barely imagine forgetting it. He said more than once that he felt like someone was standing just outside his kitchen window after dark, though he could never actually catch anyone there when he looked, just a lingering sense that the space outside the glass had held a shape only seconds before. Local police, stretched thin with an active missing persons case pulling resources from every direction, treated it the way you'd expect, as an old man living alone, maybe a little lonely, maybe starting to lose track of things. A couple of officers even joked about it back at the station, calling him the porch light guy. Not unkindly, just the way tired people joke about anything that isn't the priority sitting directly in front of them. Detective Reyes was the one who eventually drove out to check on him personally, mostly out of courtesy more than suspicion, expecting to spend 20 minutes reassuring a lonely old man and then getting back to the real work of the case. What he found, he told me, was a man who didn't seem confused at all. Sharp, precise, almost unsettlingly calm as he described exactly what had been happening. Down to specific dates, specific times, small details that didn't fit the profile of someone simply losing their grip on reality. He kept a small notebook, Reyes said, dates and times written in careful, almost clinical handwriting, like he understood, even before anyone else did, that these details might matter eventually, that someone someday would need exactly this kind of record. And there was something else. Something Reyes said he couldn't shake for years afterward. Reyes walked the property that day, in daylight, with the old man watching from his back porch. Nothing unusual, at least nothing he could point to directly in an official report. But he told me that as he stood near the edge of the tree-line, he felt something he'd never been able to explain in 11 years on the force. A specific physical sense of being watched from somewhere back in that woodland, strong enough that he actually drew his weapon halfway before catching himself and feeling foolish about it, glancing around quickly to make sure none of the other officers present had noticed him do it. He went back 3 more times over the following weeks, sometimes announced, sometimes not, wanting to see the property at different hours, different light. Each visit, the old man had a new detail. A smell of turned earth near his back fence that hadn't been there before, sharp and mineral. The kind of smell that clings to clothing long after you've walked away from it. A section of his lawn that seemed subtly disturbed, like something had been buried and the ground hadn't quite settled back into place. A slight unevenness you'd only notice if you were looking for it. Once, disturbingly, the old man mentioned hearing what he described as digging sounds late at night, coming from somewhere out past the tree-line, always stopping the moment he turned on his outdoor lights, as if whoever or whatever was out there could see exactly when they'd been noticed, and knew precisely how long to stay still before starting again. Patient in a way that unsettled the old man more than the sounds themselves ever did. Reyes requested cadaver dogs be brought to the property. His request was denied. Not enough evidence to justify the resources, according to the department at the time, and the old man's reports were still, officially, being treated with some skepticism by the higher-ups reviewing case files from a distance, never having sat across from the man themselves. He pushed for it twice more over the following month, and was turned down both times, the second time by a supervisor who told him, not unkindly, that he was letting an old man's imagination pull him away from the actual leads on the case, that resources were finite and Diane's case needed every hour they could give it on paths more likely to produce results. Frustrated, and increasingly unable to sleep himself, Reyes did something outside procedure that he told me he still isn't entirely comfortable admitting to, even all these years later. He went back to the property alone, at night, without backup, without official permission, carrying nothing but a flashlight and his own growing certainty that something was very wrong out past that tree-line. A certainty he couldn't yet justify to anyone else on paper. He walked the same path the old man had described the digging sounds coming from. The woods were denser than they looked from the house, he said, thick enough that his flashlight beam barely cut more than a few feet ahead of him at a time, branches closing overhead until the October moonlight barely reached the ground at all. And near the edge of the woods, half covered by fallen leaves and displaced soil, he found a section of ground that looked recently disturbed. Not old, not settled, but fresh, like it had been worked within the last few days. Roughly the size and shape, he told me quietly, his voice dropping even over the phone all these years later, of a place where something or someone might have been laid to rest temporarily. He didn't dig. He told me that was the hardest decision of his career, standing there at 11 o'clock at night with a flashlight and a feeling in his gut he'd never doubted before or since, and forcing himself to walk away instead of digging with his bare hands right then and there, the way every instinct in his body was telling him to. He knew that if there was something under that soil, disturbing the scene himself would compromise everything, potentially destroy the one piece of physical evidence that might finally break the case open after months of dead ends. So he marked the location as best he could in the dark, using a broken branch and a mental count of paces from a specific tree, memorizing the angle back toward the old man's porch light glowing faintly through the trees, walked back to his car, and drove straight to the station to file for a proper search warrant, this time with enough specific detail, the old man's notebook, his own observations, the survey map connection, that it couldn't be denied by anyone reviewing the request. The warrant came through 2 days later. 2 days that Reyes told me felt like the longest of his career, checking his phone constantly, barely sleeping, half expecting news that would break the case wide open, half terrified of exactly what that news might mean for a town that had spent months hoping, quietly, that Diane might still somehow be found alive. By the time he returned with a full team, the ground had been disturbed again. Whatever had been buried there, if anything had been buried there, was gone. The soil had been worked over, smoothed, made to look untouched in a way that only someone who knew exactly what they were doing could manage in just 2 days without leaving obvious tool marks behind. The forensic team found almost nothing usable. A few soil samples that showed signs of disturbance consistent with digging, but nothing conclusive enough to build a case around. Nothing that would survive a defense attorney's scrutiny in a courtroom. No fibers. No trace evidence. Nothing with Diane's name on it in any sense that would hold up. Reyes told me that standing in those woods that morning, watching the forensic team pack up their equipment with nothing to show for it, was one of the worst moments of his career, worse in some ways than finding nothing at all, because for 2 days he had genuinely believed they were close, that Diane's family might finally get an answer, and then watching that possibility close back over like water settling after a stone sinks beneath the surface. The old man's reports stopped almost immediately after that. No more porch lights turning on by themselves. No more unlocked doors. No more digging sounds in the night. When Reyes went to check on him one final time, about a week later, the property looked exactly as it always had. Quiet, ordinary. Nothing at all to suggest that anything unusual had ever happened there. The old man himself seemed different too, Reyes said. Not relieved, exactly. More like someone who had been holding his breath for months and had finally, cautiously, allowed himself to exhale, without quite trusting that it was safe to do so, still glancing toward the treeline out of habit every time he stepped onto his back porch. Diane's case remained unsolved. Still unsolved today, over a decade later. But Reyes told me something before we ended our conversation that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. He believes the old man wasn't imagining any of it. He believes someone. Likely someone with far more familiarity with that stretch of woodland than any official suspect they ever investigated. Someone who had grown up walking those trails, who knew every deer path and drainage ditch better than any map could show. Had used that property as a temporary location before moving whatever or whoever had been buried there to somewhere far more permanent, somewhere that's never been found, possibly somewhere miles away, possibly somewhere that will never be searched because nobody has any reason to look there. And he believes the reason the old man's porch light kept turning on, the reason his back door kept coming unlocked, the reason he felt watched from his own kitchen window night after night, wasn't random malfunction or an old man's failing memory at all. He believes someone was testing how closely they were being watched, learning the old man's patterns, learning exactly when it was safe to move through that property undetected, and when it wasn't, using small, deniable disturbances to map out an old man's routine the way you'd study a security system before attempting something you couldn't afford to be seen doing, adjusting their approach in real time based on how the old man reacted to each small intrusion. Reyes retired 4 years ago, the case still open on paper, still unsolved in every way that matters. He told me he still drives past that stretch of road sometimes, still glances toward that treeline without meaning to, still wonders about a piece of ground that was disturbed once, briefly, and then made to look like nothing had ever happened there at all. He told me he still keeps a copy of that old man's notebook, the original having long since been filed away and likely forgotten in some evidence storage room, but he'd photographed every page before it disappeared into the system, and he still looks through those photographs sometimes, late at night, searching for some detail he might have missed the first dozen times he'd read through them. The old man passed away several years ago, in his sleep, in that same house he'd lived in for most of his adult life. As far as anyone knows, the strange occurrences never happened again after that final visit from Reyes. No more lights, no more unlocked doors, no more feeling of being watched from the treeline. The property was sold not long after, the old man's children having no interest in keeping it. Reyes told me he drove past it once, a few years back, just to see who had moved in. A young couple, he said, with 2 small kids playing in the yard. A swing set installed exactly where the old man's vegetable garden used to be. No idea, presumably, about what had once happened at the edge of their treeline. No reason to ever think about it at all. Diane's family still lives in Ashford Hollow. Her mother, Reyes told me, still leaves the porch light on every single night, a small, almost unconscious ritual that started sometime after her daughter disappeared and never stopped, though she's never fully explained why, even to close friends who've asked. Whether she knows about the old man's story or not, Reyes couldn't say for certain. But he told me that detail has stayed with him longer than almost anything else from the entire case. 2 households, unconnected on paper, both keeping a light burning through the dark for reasons neither of them could fully put into words. Whether that means whatever was out there simply moved on to somewhere else entirely, or whether it means something else, something Reyes still won't say out loud, even now, even after everything he's told me. I'll leave that for you to decide. That's tonight's story here on Midnight Whispers. Some of you have asked why we occasionally step outside pure ghost stories into cases like this one. The truth is, some of the most unsettling stories aren't the ones with something supernatural haunting the dark. They're the ones where something entirely human was out there the whole time, patient enough, careful enough, methodical enough to make an old man question his own sanity rather than risk being seen. Those are the stories that stay with you longer, I think, because there's no closure waiting at the end of them. No door to walk through, just an open case file, a stretch of road that some people still won't drive down after dark, and a porch light that's been burning every night for over a decade. Diane's case remains open. If anyone listening has information related to unsolved missing persons cases in your own area, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local authorities. Sometimes, the smallest detail someone thought was unimportant for years turns out to be exactly the piece that was missing. Until next time, sleep well, and maybe check that your porch light is actually working the way it should.